Good afternoon to all of you. I'm Satish Kumar, and today we are going to look at we'll look at introduction to plate buckling, and then we'll see how plate buckling theory affects local buckling, which is used in something called section classification. And based on section classification, we will go to the design of beams. Okay, so that is how we will be proceeding. So we will the contents for the first presentation are like this. That is introduction and critical stress for plate buckling. Then post-buckling behavior and effective width. This just I want to give some introduction to post-buckling behavior, and after that we will proceed to stability of the plates, and we'll have a quick look at buckling of web plates in shear. Web plates buckling in shear is important for plate girders, but we are not going to go into plate girders today. But we'll just have a look at that, and then we'll proceed to local buckling. Along the way, I will also be touching upon some basic concepts of plastic analysis or plastic theory, which is very useful to analyze many and design many types of structures. And we will see, because we are going to limit state design. Yesterday I told you that plastic analysis is one of the enabling features which helps us to go beyond the first yield point, and then it tells us exactly at what load a particular beam or a structure will collapse. Okay, and then we'll use section classification and how local buckling helps us in the design. Okay, so this is a little advanced, but we just need to understand the concept of what is plate buckling. We don't need to go into the mathematics of it. So what I'm just going to show is just this is a plate which is subjected to uniform compression of nx per unit width or whatever. The width of the plate incidentally is B, and the depth or the length of the plate is A. So we have marked the x and y axis. X axis is along the length, and y axis is along the width, and the z axis is out of the plane of the plate. Okay, so we are only pressing the plate, and then as a consequence the plate is going to buckle out of its plane. So that will, the deformations will be in the z direction. Okay. So this plate is assumed to be simply supported along all four edges. So that means those edges cannot move out of their position, but at the same time they will allow rotation like in a normal hinge in a beam. So it's only a two-dimensional concept of something like a beam. So we are now going to apply this axial load in the plate, that is in plane load we call it when it comes to a plate. And then as a consequence what happens? So as I go on increasing the axial load, what is likely to happen is that the middle strip, the strip AB will start buckling, and then basically the strip will try to come out of the plane of the plate. Okay. So in that process what will happen is the transverse strip CD is the middle strip tries to buckle, and then the transverse strip, which is not having any compression along its length, so it is not willing to buckle, I would say. So it will try to bend as a consequence and try to restrain this middle strip from buckling further. Okay. So in a column what happens is once the column starts buckling, there is no way the column can be stopped from continuing to deform and collapse. So that we say column buckling is unstable. Okay. But in plate buckling what happens is the transverse strip CD goes into bending, and it is not a unstable phenomena. It tries to pull back the or restrain the strip AB from buckling further. Okay. So as a consequence plate buckling becomes stable, and then that gives us a extra strength beyond the initial buckling of strip AB. Okay. So that is called the post buckling strength. So now we can always set up an equation like we did for column. So yesterday we assumed a buckle shape, and then we wrote a differential equation. In this case plate buckling equation will be in terms of the deformation at a point xy which is z or w. W will be the deformation of a point xy in the z direction. Okay. So based on that, if I write an equation, I'll get what is called as a partial differential equation of fourth order. Okay. So this equation, if you try to solve, basically you can solve it by a method called inspection. and in that process what we get is we get the deformation W as a summation of Wmn, which gives you the magnitude Mn at a point Mn, and into sine of m pi x by a into sine of n pi y by a. That is, you have half sine waves in the x and y direction. So that is how this can be looked into. And if we put this assumed let's say W into the second equation, that is this one, that is the first equation, we differentiate this 4 times partially with respect to x and so on, and we substitute, we get this equation. And if we simplify, we finally get the critical buckling load for plate in this form. So here we find that the critical buckling load actually depends on both the length of the plate and A and the width of the plate B, but we further simplify it and we go for the lowest value of n, and we come to this one. And if we plot this critical buckling load, actually it will plot as a function of A by B, it will plot in some form like this. So but then we say that we are not interested in the length A coming into picture. So what we are going to do is we go back and we basically assume the smallest value of this one, and that we replace it as a factor k. Okay, so this k factor we saw just now that it's a function of A by B, but then we assume the smallest value for that, and then we make this a function of, that is, we put A by B as 1, and we get the lowest critical buckling load. Okay, so if the plate happens to be exactly A times long, the square plate, let's say, so then you get the lowest critical load. Okay, so we find that sigma critical or F critical is K pi square E by 12 into 1 minus nu square. Nu is Poisson's ratio into B by T bracket square. Okay, so this is, we have got the buckling stress, and this looks quite similar to what we get for a column, which is pi square E by L by R bracket square, right? Instead of L by R, which is called the slenderness ratio, B by T is now called the width to thickness ratio. So the key word here is the plate buckling stress depends on the width to thickness ratio of the plate. Okay, so and why it is so important in this is because the strip CD is the one which controls the buckling of the plate rather than the strip AB. Okay, so AB is sort of buckling freely, but the width CD, which is giving the restraint, that is controlling the buckling stress. And this K is, we know that for columns for various end conditions we use K into L, KL, that is effective length as KL. So the effective slenderness ratio we call it as KL by R. So instead of putting K here as KB by T, we are keeping it outside in the numerator as a different K, and that is called the plate buckling coefficient. Okay, so that is the K here. So we get a fairly simple expression for buckling of a long plate where A is either 1 or something greater than 1, but we are getting a low bound value of the buckling stress. Okay, so what will happen now is, like, if the plate is, let's say, 2 times the length of the plate is 2 times the width of the plate, that is A is equal to 2B, then the plate sort of divides itself into 2 squares. So if this square comes out, that is, it buckles upwards, the next one goes downwards. Okay, so that is how one comes up and the other goes down. If the length of the plate is 3 times B, then it tries to buckle in 3 half sine waves, so that it divides again itself into square patterns. So the first and the third one is coming up and the middle one is going down. So suppose the length was 2.7 times B, right? So that is, it's not an integral multiple of B. So then also it will try its best to divide into 3 equal panels. So the first one may be 0.9B, 0.9B and 0.9B. So 0.9 into 3 will give you 2.7B, right? So that is how it will divide. Okay. So what we are saying is that in reality the coefficient K will vary like this. This is for a plate with all 4 edges simply supported. So but then we don't want, this is the first buckling mode. Higher buckling modes are not of interest to us because plates do have imperfections, so always they buckle in the first mode, practical plates. So we are not so much interested in these curves. We are interested in the curve for m equal to 1. And even here we are not interested in all these points. We are saying that we'll take the lowest value for simplification and use K as 4. Okay. So once I get K as 4, I know for a given B by T, these are anyway material constants. So I can quickly work out what is the stress at which this plate will buckle. Okay, so we can do the same thing for different end conditions, and we can work out the buckling coefficient K. So for uniaxial compression, that is, plate is getting compressed only in one direction, but these two edges, so the other edges are called the longitudinal edges, that is along the length. So they are hinge. So we just saw that the plate buckling coefficient will be about 4. Okay, if these edges are fixed, that is, they don't deform but they don't allow rotation also, right? So the plate cannot buckle like this. It has to start with 0 slope, buckle and come back to 0 slope. So it will be like a full sine wave, complete sine wave. That is fixed condition. The coefficient K is 6.97. So you get almost 7 times, the K value is almost 7. Okay, but what is, so there are different, for different end conditions we have different K values. The most important for us is for a hinged free condition, where one edge is hinged but the other edge is free. So in this condition, what will happen is you will get a value of 0.43, which is less than 1/10 of, let's say, around 1/8 of this value, right? 4. So that means plates which have one edge fixed, hinged, and other free will first buckle at very low values, and compared to that, the plates which have both edges hinged will buckle almost at 8 times more values. Okay, so similar analysis can be done for shear buckling of plate also. These are the shear buckling coefficients. We'll just see how shear buckling looks later on, but let's proceed and see what is the consequence of this plate buckling now. Okay, now in the design of plate elements, because most cross sections are made up of plated elements, we have something called the limiting width to thickness ratio. What we are doing is, we don't want the plate to buckle within the elastic limit. We want, as I compress, we want the plate to reach the yield stress first, and then once it reaches yield stress, if it buckles, that's okay. So we don't want elastic buckling of plate. So what we are doing is, we are equating the buckling stress, what we got here, F critical. We are saying that this should be greater than or equal to Fy. That means if it is equal, then we will get the largest B by T that we can allow. Okay, so these are the limiting B by T ratios which we try to calculate by equating the F critical to Fy, and then once we do that, then Fy comes into picture. So we get the limiting B by T value as square root of K pi square E by 12 into 1 minus nu square Fy, and for, as I said, any grade of steel, Young's modulus and Poisson's ratio are generally constant. So we can even actually substitute these numbers, and pi square is also a constant. So for a given support condition, let's say hinge, if I take K as 4, then this entire thing becomes a constant. So I can write this as C by root Fy. So many codes prescribe the B by T limiting values as C by root Fy. What our code is doing is, it's substituting Fy also as 250. So this entire thing becomes a number. So C divided by root of 250, whatever is that number. So it gives you directly that number and says you use this number for my steel plates. And if there are, if your plate is made of some other strength of steel, then you have a correction factor which is called epsilon. So we will see that we can correct this value, limiting value, by epsilon. Okay, so that is as far as the buckling stress is concerned. Now, as I said, the plate buckling is stable. So what is happening is, even though the plate has buckled, it can continue to take additional load. So now we are actually interested to know what is the load at which, or what is the stress at which this plate will eventually fail. Fail in the sense it can't take any further load and it starts buckling unstable manner. So this was first studied by Von Karman, and he realized that as the middle strip buckles, this stress that you see here is the F critical. So it will not take any further stress, and as a consequence, only the middle strip has buckled, but the edge strips, that is strips next to that are further able to take load. Okay, because these two are my longitudinal edges and they are hinged. So they will hinge in the sense they will not allow out of plane deformation, but they will allow in plane deformation. Okay, so as I go on increasing the stress until this edge stresses become yield stresses, same equal to the yield stress, this plate can continue to take further load. and at that point anyway my stress distribution is nonlinear. So it is difficult to calculate what would be the total load taken by the plate. So what he told was you can do something interesting, which is called as, you can convert this nonlinear stress distribution into two equal rectangular distributions such that this area of these two same as the area of this total curve under the total curve. Okay. So we say that some middle part of the plate becomes not effective, right? So we say that these two halves represent together the effective width of the plate. Okay. So if we take that, then he could find that B effective by B is simply represented by square root of F critical by Fy. Okay. So this only the term in the curved bracket, square root of that is the effective width of a plate. So that into B will give me the effective width, and the ultimate strength I can quickly calculate as Fy into the effective width into thickness. Okay, so that will be the ultimate strength. So here I am talking of ultimate strength per meter width of the plate, right? So that unit thickness of the plate. So I have written as Fy into B effective. Okay, so this is a theoretical derivation. But yesterday we saw that columns have Euler gave us the theoretical critical stress, but then practical columns have imperfections, residual stresses, and load is not exactly collinear, things like that. So as a consequence, they buckle at a lower value, right? So similarly, plates also have imperfections, they have residual stresses, and their loading exactly may not be in the center line of the plate. So in that case, they will buckle at a value which is lower. So to understand what value we should use for design, Winter tested several plates and then he gave a small correction, which is this square bracket. So he said that if you multiply with this square bracket, then you get an effective width which is matching with the actual test results. Okay, so that is how it is possible to predict the post buckling strength of plates, and this we commonly do when we talk of design of members made of what are called cold form steel. That is steel which is not hot rolled but cold formed. So in that case we are able to use this effective width method and calculate the ultimate strength. But for hot roll we will limit ourselves to the buckling stress. We will not go for the post buckling stress. So now it helps us to understand plate buckling better if we compare it with column buckling. Okay, so let's look at how a column buckles. We saw that an ideal column, it will go on taking axial load until P critical is reached, the Euler's critical load, and then suddenly it will buckle. So it will have a secondary path which is horizontal. Okay, so that is an unstable buckling of a perfect ideal column. But practical columns do have some imperfections, so they start buckling from the beginning, but they don't lose their stiffness so quickly. So as I approach the critical buckling load, they lose their stiffness and they go asymptotic to this curve. Okay, so these are actual buckling curves for practical columns. If you look at a plate, what happens is something similar happens for an ideal plate. It goes up until you reach F critical, but then after that, instead of buckling suddenly, it continues to take further load. That means it does have a positive stiffness, so it can take further load. Of course, deformation will, out of plane deformation will increase more and more, but in practical plates, you start with an initial imperfection and then it goes like this. So you don't have a well-defined buckling strength point, but the slope remains fairly steep, more or less. That is more important for us. So that is also used in design. So most of the plates which are very slender are used for design. So this slide will just give, this just gives us the stiffness values for a plate. So if you look at the test results for columns, we saw that Euler's curve plots like this as a what is that, pi square E by L by R bracket square. If you plot versus the slenderness ratio, it plots like this, and then F equal to Fy is the critical, the limiting value. So together they represent the column strength curve, and all the test results fall below that. So yesterday we saw that we use 4 column strength curves A, B, C, D depending on the type of column that we are looking at. And in case of plates, what happens is the test results plot somewhat like this. So as the plates become more and more slender, you get larger and larger post buckling strength. So this is my buckling stress theoretical value, but this practical plates can have something called more extra strength beyond the buckling, that is post buckling strength. Okay, so that's what we saw. Winter enables us to calculate that strength. Okay, so now let's look at what happens when I take a plate and subject it to shear force, in plane shear. So let's say we apply shear force like this. So there will be a, if I try to shear like this, normally the plate may rotate, right? There has to be a complementary shear, otherwise the plate will rotate. So for equilibrium you need to have what is called as complementary shear, and I am applying the shear V by the area, cross sectional area will be my tau critical. So as I apply this, if I plot like a Mohs circle or the principal stresses, so I'll realize that these two have a component in this along this diagonal, so they will compress this diagonal, whereas these two again have a tensile force in the other diagonal. So depending on the shape of the plate or the aspect ratio of the plate, one diagonal will go in tension, other diagonal will go in compression, and I go on increasing this tau critical. What will happen is the diagonal in compression will buckle. So it is as if the plate is oriented at 45 degrees and this diagonal will buckle, and the tensile diagonal will continue to carry further load. So even shear buckling is stable, and we know what is the shear buckling coefficient for a plate. So that is how we use this in a design of plate girder webs. So this is what is called as tension field action, which adds up to the shear buckling strength. So the shear buckling critical theoretical value of shear buckling stress is tau critical, but practical value for imperfect plates is tau b. So the code gives you how to calculate tau b from tau critical. So this would have been the buckling stress. So in addition to that, we have another expression which adds to the which is the post buckling strength. So together they represent the total load at which the plate will fail in shear. Okay, so that is just an introduction to plate buckling. We are not going to go deep into that. Now we'll proceed to how plate buckling affects our routine design, right? So we have to look into what is called as local buckling, and then how that affects, and to tackle that we have developed this method called section classification. Okay, so we know that most of the steel sections that we use, they are not like plates, but they are actually made up of plates. Like for example, an I section is made up of 3 plates, a box section is made up of 4 plates, and so on. But that is just one part of it. But what is important from the plate buckling theory point of view is the end conditions. So here this plate, even though it is a single plate physically, we can look at it as made up of 2 plates. Okay, so the first plate or both the plates are actually having hinge condition at the web, and they are having one edge free. So one edge is hinged, one edge is free. So these are called outstands. So the I section has 1, 2, 3, 4 outstanding elements and one internal element which has both edges hinged. So as I compress this I section, actually what is likely to happen is, depending on the B by T of this plate or the D by T of this plate, for B by T of this, the flange width to thickness ratio, I should use K coefficient, buckling coefficient as 4, and for buckling of the web, for flange I should use 0.43, and for buckling of the web I should use 4. Okay, so depending on whichever has a lower buckling stress, that will buckle first, and the other will try to restrain it from buckling little bit for some time, but again eventually I'll reach the buckling stress of the other plate also, so those plates also will buckle. So the entire cross section is going to locally buckle and it will form waves. Okay, I think I have a picture to show you here. Here what we are assuming is that the B by T is such that the critical buckling stress for the flange is lower than the buckling stress for the web. So web has not yet buckled, but the flanges will buckle like this, okay, in a wavy pattern. So this free edge is free to buckle, but the flange web junction, this center line will not buckle, right? So it will remain straight because the web is connected to it like this. So what happens is, if a flange comes up like this here due to buckling, then it finds it easier to buckle downwards in the other side. So these lines which you see drawn, it shows this has come up whereas that edge has gone down. Similarly, this has come up and this edge has gone down. So these are alternately rotated like this, and the buckling is happening. Okay, so this is called local buckling. So basically local buckling gives distortion of the cross section, but the axis of the member remains straight. Okay, so that is, if the axis bends, then it's called global buckling. So here we are telling that no, axis is straight, the member has not buckled as a whole, but only the component plates have buckled. So this is called local buckling. We don't want this also to happen in real columns. Okay, even though local buckling is stable, we don't want this happening in hot rolled columns. So we have to calculate now, either we limit the B by T values. We say that the flange cannot, B by T value cannot be beyond a certain value, or we allow it and then ask the designer to make sure that at what load it will buckle, and then as what will be the consequence of that buckling on design. Okay, so either way can be done. So in the previous codes we said that okay, you don't, it's like never cross this line, right? So we have a B by T limit, you should not go beyond this in any case. So that was the criteria. But then you can always make your own I section with thin plates, right? So then you don't know what is going to happen. So in that case, this will enable you to understand at least at what load it will buckle and whether that's acceptable or not. Okay, so that freedom is given in the new code. So it says that you can use any B by T, but then you need to find at what load it will buckle and take care of that in the design. Okay, so in beams we don't apply uniform compression, we apply bending. So but still the compression flange will go in uniform compression more or less, and it buckles locally. Okay, so that is this may remain straight, the tension flange, but compression flange may buckle locally. And if you have a box section, again the flange and the web both can also buckle locally. Okay, so what happens is, basically what we are saying is we need to be aware of local buckling, and then we need to be able to take it into account in the design of compression members and members under bending. So the first thing we'll do is what is called as section classification. Now before we go for that, let's look at some basic concepts of plastic analysis. So what yesterday I was telling you in the limit state design that elastic analysis assumes the first yield anywhere in the beam as the collapse point, and it doesn't go beyond that, right? Whereas plastic analysis helps you to analyze the progressive failure of the beam, right, until it collapses, and as such it gives you the correct collapse load. Okay, so you know exactly what factor of safety you have. Correct. Okay, so let's take a fixed beam. It's an indeterminate structure, and we go on, we put a UDL W per meter run. I put it as a thick line here, and I go on increasing the uniformly distributed load. So initially my bending moment diagram will be like this. This is hogging at the supports, and this is sagging at the midspan. And as I go on increasing this, at this cross section, the bending moment will reach the first yield moment My. Okay, it will start yielding. Plastification across the cross section will occur as shown here. So this stress will reach Fy, and then it cannot take any further stress, so it will remain at Fy, whereas the inner fibers, subsequent fibers will start reaching yield until the entire cross section has reached yield stress, plus yield stress or minus yield stress. So that is yielding in let's say compression and yielding in tension, whatever. Okay, so that situation the beam can take a moment called MP, which is called the full plastic moment or the plastic moment of the cross section. So that is, it will reach that, and then after this it cannot take any further bending moment because it has reached its full plastic moment. So what will happen is, we say that it has become like a plastic hinge. We lump the plasticity at a point and we say that this hinge will now go on rotating at constant MP. Okay, so that is what we find here. We have put orange dots here. So this beam has become like, I would say, a simply supported beam with equal end moments MP. So it's actually better than a simply supported beam, but then it will behave after that more or less like a simply supported beam. So this moments now will remain MP, this moment also will remain MP, and as I increase further, the bending moment can only go up now, okay, at this point. So this eventually the middle section also will reach MP, so a third hinge will form and then the whole beam will collapse. That is, it will not physically fall down, but it will go on increasing in deflection. So basically we will say that the beam has almost collapsed. We want beams to be more or less limited in deflection. So but then that will not happen, it will deflect so much that we can't call it a beam anymore. Okay, so that is called as a collapse. So we can calculate by plastic analysis what is the UDL or what is corresponding any type of load at which a particular mechanism will form, and things like that. Okay, and then based on that we can put a factor of safety to that collapse load and use it in design. Okay, now all this is possible only if local buckling does not occur from starting from this point or even before this point all along the way until I develop the first two plastic hinges and I continue further loading. So these plastic hinges also don't locally buckle and it finally reaches the collapse mechanism. So then only the plastic analysis is valid. So as we saw, elastic analysis is valid only up to first yield. So once this stress in the cross section anywhere in the beam reaches yield, it is not valid. So similarly, plastic analysis has some limitations. It will be valid provided local buckling does not occur anywhere in the member. Okay, so that is one of the requirements. So that means we have to limit the B/T values if you want to do a plastic analysis. And if we want to consider local buckling, then the analysis becomes even more complicated. Okay, so we don't want to, normally we don't do that for routine design. So we either do elastic analysis or we do plastic analysis and we take care of that local buckling in an indirect way. So now we want to see how we take care of that. So what I've just told you is, if you plot the movement rotation curve, that is this plastic hinge reaches My, MP and then it goes on rotating, right? So that curve is plotted here. So I've taken a particular cross section and I've applied a moment M. So this cross section has will rotate by some theta, and as I reach My, it will start yielding at the extreme fibers. So the stiffness will change slowly. So in reality, you will not even realize the change. You can't even see with your eye any change in the stiffness. But then there is a change, and then it will start changing more and more. It will reach a moment called MP. So if it is ideally elastic, perfectly plastic, it will reach like this to MP and then it will go flat at MP. So the movement rotation curve will stay at MP, but in reality due to strain hardening etc., it may go even above MP and then eventually it will come down back to MP. So we say that this section is having a rotation capacity of phi u, okay, where this actual line comes down below MP. Okay, so up to this point, if it can rotate and maintain the plastic movement MP. So those sections are called plastic sections. Okay, and those are the ones which can be analyzed by plastic analysis. So but as you increase the B/T values, so at this point basically what is happening is inelastic local buckling does occur, and then so it yields the entire cross section yields, but then afterwards when I further increase the load, inelastic local buckling occurs and then it eventually comes down, right? So that controls the rotation capacity of the beam. So if inelastic local buckling is more pronounced because of a larger width to thickness ratio, this curve will come down much faster. Okay, so that means if I go back, maybe the first two hinges will form, but then before the third hinge forms, these hinges would have locally buckled. They will not be maintaining MP when this becomes MP. So again, plastic analysis is not valid. Okay, so such sections are called compact sections, and they do reach MP, but they don't maintain the MP for larger rotations. So then further, if I increase the B/T, there will be sections which cross My, they reach first yield, but they can't even reach MP. So you can only do elastic analysis. Your pure bending theory like M/I equal to F/Y, that can be used to calculate My, and after that we don't know whether it will buckle here or here. It is not possible to calculate. So conservatively we will take the capacity as My, okay, and then it will come down. And as I further go beyond that B/T limit which I told you in one of the slides, then the section may buckle even in the elastic limit. That is, even before my stress reaches Fy, the section will buckle, which means even our normal pure bending theory is not applicable for such sections unless we calculate the effective width and take only that part as effective. Okay, so those are called slender sections. So like that. So the code says you are not allowed to use slender sections because your analysis is not valid for that. Okay, but you can use semi-compact sections in bending. So you will reach My. So you take the capacity of semi-compact sections as My, and for compact and plastic you can take the capacity as MP, but you can't do a structural analysis. You can do an elastic analysis and use a compact section. but then you can't do a plastic analysis unless the section is plastic. Okay, so that is called section classification. Now of course we can't always sit and draw the movement rotation curve for practical sections. So what is the easier way to classify sections? So what we do is we realize that there are limits on b by t in the middle also. So this b by t is the limit which differentiates between elastic local buckling and plastic local buckling, and this limit is the one which says that there is a high rotation capacity of such sections. So there are limits called beta 1, beta 2, beta 3 on the b by t values, which enable us to classify by just calculating b by t ratios. Okay. So if my b by t ratio is less than beta 1, we will say it's plastic. If it's between beta 1 and beta 2, we will say it's compact. And for both plastic and compact, my movement capacity is MP. And after beta 2, it will actually come down like this. But since I don't have a means of calculating this, I assume conservatively my capacity as My for semi-compact sections. And for slender sections, again, I don't have any way of calculating this. So for this thing, I'll say that I'll not use slender section, or I'll take the movement capacity as 0, okay, conservatively. So that means I'll not be able to use that section for bending, taking any bending also. For compression members, we don't have this type of classification because we are not drawing the movement rotation curve. So we will say that they should at least be semi-compact. Okay. So these limits are given in table 2 of the code, right in the beginning of the code, I would say, as width to, limits on width to thickness ratios of plate elements. So it says that if your member, let's say it's a column, so it is under axial compression. So then we have to come to this one, that is the member is under, if it is a flange, we use this. If it is a web, we use this. So if it is rolled or welded, so we use the corresponding ones. So let's say if I want to design a column roll section as a with a roll section, so I'll take outstanding element of the I section flanges as rolled and put these limits. And if I take the web, then assuming that in this case there's no neutralizers under pure compression, so these are not applicable. So I should make sure that the d by t of the web is less than 42. Okay. So these are the numbers given in the code. See, these are the beta 1, beta 2, beta 3 values which are given in the code for 250 MPa steel. So there is a correction factor for grade of steel. So if Fy is 250, epsilon is 1. So directly I check with this number. If Fy is 350, this will become like 0.87. So I'll have to multiply this with 0.87. This may reduce further and so on. So that is how these numbers are. Now why so many numbers are required? That is because we have different elements and then the imperfections are also different. So for example, if it is an outstanding element, that is one edge hinged, one edge is free to buckle, locally buckle. And if it's a rolled section, then we use 9.4, 10.5 and 15.7 as the B by T limits for the respective sections. And the same section, if I make it by welding, what happens is I introduce a lot of residual stresses. Yesterday we saw for columns, welded sections have lower strength compared to rolled sections. So here the limits are more stringent. So 9.4 becomes 8.4 and 15.7 becomes 13.6 and so on. So like that. Okay. And if it is a web which is under pure bending, so then these are the limits. But if it is under axial compression, then these are the limits. Okay. So there are other elements also, like angles for bending we have some limits and so on, and circular tubes there is a limit on the diameter to thickness ratio and so on. So this is just a sample of the code, the table given in the code. So basically what we have understood is local buckling can be prevented by limiting the B by T ratio, but we want only to prevent elastic local buckling because we are going to do elastic analysis. So we don't want our analysis going wrong, but we are not preventing inelastic local buckling, but we still want to know what could happen if we are going to use plastic analysis. Okay. So we have different limits for B by T ratios. We could also use what are called longitudinal stiffeners on the free edges to control the buckling. So but they'll have to be welded on the entire length. So they are not normally used in hot roll. They are very common in cold form steel. Then semi-compact and slender sections cannot be used in any way plastic design or plastic analysis. And for bending, we can use semi-compact sections with elastic analysis, but we have to limit our bending capacity to My. And then slender sections also have stiffness problems, so they are not allowed in hot roll steel. Then plate girders are usually designed taking advantage of the post buckling strength, which is called as a tension field action. Okay, so I'll just I think I've reached the end. I'll stop here. We'll take some questions on local buckling and section classification. The idea here was we just have to have a physical understanding of why these B by T limits are given, and then what is the consequence on the design, right? So we will take this further into to see how the code helps us to design sections for bending or compression based on local buckling. Okay, it's open for questions.
My question is regarding that table where B by T ratios are given. Although you have said that for welded and I mean, if you can open the table.
Yeah, this is the table.
Yeah, this is the one. Now here in the second row, outstanding element of compression flange, there's a lot of difference between these limitations for rolled and welded parts.
Correct.
I mean, if it is rolled and as you said just now that it is because of residual stresses.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, but we know that there will be some amount of residual stresses in rolled sections as well.
Yeah, correct. So those have been factored in into arriving at these numbers. Okay.
Yeah.
So now, similarly, residual stresses.
Why the difference? What is the reason for difference between these limits for rolled and welded section? Apart from residual stress, is there any other reason?
No, there's no other reason. Basically, what happens is when you weld a section, you create much more residual stresses. So as a consequence, the plate buckling gets affected. Okay. So like yesterday we saw columns which have welded sections have a lower strength curve compared to rolled sections. So basically that what you call residual stresses, and there may be what is called as weld distortion sometimes. So that has also been included into these numbers. Okay.
So there's no role of rigidity of the joint basically.
No role of.
In case. No role of rigidity of the
that
joint.
flange web junction. That it is assumed that it is fully rigid, adequately rigid.
The residual stresses are the only reason.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So good evening, sir.
Yeah. Good evening.
What is the aspect ratio, sir?
What is the aspect ratio? Aspect ratio is the length to width ratio of the plate. Okay. So we saw like in this derivation, for example here called the aspect ratio, but in reality our plates are very long, right? Our sections are very long. So what happens is we try and take that aspect ratio as more or less 1, because for 1 we get the minimum buckling strength. Yeah. So next we proceed to the second presentation, that is design of beams, which is covered in section 8 of the code. So basically 8.1 is gives some general remarks. 8.2 talks about design strength of a beam. So now we want to know, like, if we take some I section, let's say ISMB 300 or some welded section or whatever, how to calculate the strength of this section, okay, in bending. Okay. So that is covered in the code. We will come to this afterwards. Before that, let's look at what happens when we apply a load on a beam, right? So normally what you might have studied is like beams resist loads by predominantly bending moments and shear forces, right? So there are two kind of effects. One is it creates bending moment, and then the other one is it creates shear force. But in reality, the flow of what you call load or stress is pretty complex. So if I take a simply supported beam, I apply a point load, this flow will be going like a parabolic arch. There will be a compressive stress trajectory by which the load will go into the supports. There is also a tensile stress trajectory, which is like a cable. So it's like the beam acts as if it's an arch plus a cable stuck together, and that's how it actually transfers the load. Okay, and as a consequence, what happens is there are other forces which are coming in. There could be at the support, the web is getting compressed, there is a stress concentration. So there are a variety of failure modes in beams. But major failure mode which we should first understand is that as I go on bending the beam, what is happening is the section above the neutral axis, is essentially under compression, right? So it is like a T section basically like this. So I'm actually compressing when I'm going to bend the beam, it is going to go on like this bending. This upper part is under compression and it behaves as if it's something similar to a column. So it will suddenly buckle out of plane, right? So the tension part will not buckle, the lower part will remain straight, but the upper part will go out of plane, right? So that is called lateral buckling of the beam. So if you don't want this to happen, we have to give lateral support to the beam, right? So that's something which we'll have to do. The other option is we need to calculate the strength considering lateral buckling into account. Okay, so these are the two possibilities. So if lateral buckling doesn't occur and I continue to further go on bending this beam, and I'm also assuming that local buckling also may not occur because I have limited my width to thickness ratio of the flange, etc. Then I will eventually reach the plastic hinge formation. That is, I'll reach a moment MP and the beam will form what is known as a plastic hinge. Okay, so that is how normally we are in plastic analysis. We assume that it will eventually fail by plastic hinge formation, right? So even in elastic analysis, we may assume that it will at least reach the first yield moment. That is, the extreme fibers may reach My, but then in reality, before that, lateral deflection and twist may occur, right? Lateral buckling may occur. Okay, so that's something which we have to understand. Then, as I said, local buckling of flange in compression can occur. The web can buckle in shear. I showed you how a web plate or a plate in shear can buckle locally, right? So in the compression diagonal can buckle, so that can happen. Then web can also buckle in compression between the two flanges, right? So we have a point load. So this web which is like this between the two flanges, it may buckle like this, right? So that web buckling in compression also is possible. Then there are local failure modes like yielding of the web in shear. So actually the web yields in shear, and or the crushing of the web can occur and so on. And then buckling of thin flanges, right? So these are possible failure modes. So first let's look at when a beam is going to reach its plastic movement capacity. So it should not laterally buckle. The non-fit element should buckle locally or whatever until the desired MP is reached, the plastic movement capacity is reached, and limit state of serviceability, of course, a deflection check will satisfy separately, and members should behave as per our analysis that we have adopted. Okay, so so basically we classify beams as laterally supported beams, that is where the lateral buckling will not occur, and laterally unsupported beams where lateral buckling can occur. Okay, so now we are going to go back and see how first let's look at laterally supported beams. Okay, as I said, they will go on bending, and then the extreme fibers will reach Fy, and then we further bend, the subsequent fibers will yield, and the cross section will reach MP, right? So the first thing you should know is how to calculate MP for a given cross section. Okay, so let's first start with a rectangular cross section, and we see that the strain distribution, we are again assuming plane sections continue to remain plane even after the yielding has commenced. Okay, so that is an assumption on which we keep the strain linear, and then eventually at MP what happens is the entire cross section has plastified. Now at this point the only equation that we have is the equilibrium equation, that is the stress resultant on the compression side should be equal to the stress resultant on the tension side, or C should be equal to T. Now C or T is given by, let's say if my width is B and depth is D, so basically half of this cross section, that is 0.5 BD, is in compression and the other half is in tension. So the area of cross section which is in compression into Fy or sigma y gives me the C value. So T is also same. So which actually means that this axis, which is called as the plastic neutral axis, has to divide this cross section into two equal parts, because if the two areas are not same, that is actually if suppose the section was unsymmetrical, then we have area in compression into Fy should be equal to area in tension into Fy. Since Fy gets cancelled, area in compression has to be equal to area in tension. So it is actually called the equal area axis. Okay, so that is how we first locate the neutral axis, and then with reference to the neutral axis we locate the CG of that area which is in compression, and we draw the stress resultant C at that CG and draw the stress resultant to the CG of the lower area. So this in this diagram, okay, and then that gives you the lever arm. So that gives you the calculation for MP. So in this case, since it is exactly in the middle of here, so this is D by 4, D by 2 and D by 4. So that means the lever arm between C and T is D by 2. So either I can calculate as C into D by 2 or T into D by 2, or if I take moment about neutral axis, I am going to calculate as C into D by 4 plus T into D by 4. Okay, so that is what has been written here. So basically BD by 2, we are substituting BD by 2 as C and T, and we get the MP as BD square by 4 into Fy. Okay, so this looks quite similar to our MP, which is I by Y max into Fy, right, as per pure bending theory. So I by Y max, we used to call it as the elastic section modulus. So we call this as a plastic section modulus. So here we are going to first calculate MP based on this stress equilibrium, and then we will back calculate ZP as MP by Fy. Okay, so that is how we will calculate the plastic section modulus for a given cross section. Now you know that ZP is here we have got ZP as BD square by 4 for a rectangular section. Okay, and you know that ZE is BD square by 6 for a rectangular section. So if I say that this is little bit more than this, basically it is the ratio of ZP by ZE, which is 1.5. Okay, so that means this beam can take 50% more capacity in bending compared to beam which is going to end with elastic limit. Okay, elastic limit, that is the first yield moment. So if what we are saying is, if you do an elastic analysis of the cross section, you are going to say that as soon as the stress reaches Fy here, the beam is collapsed. So we are limiting to My, and in this case we are saying that the entire cross section can plastify. So at the cross section level itself, we get a 50% increase in the movement capacity of the beam, right. So that is why plastic analysis is definitely economical, gives you more economical sections. Now this number incidentally depends on the shape of the cross section. So it's called as a shape factor. Okay, it's called a shape factor. Now let's see what happens when I go for a I section. If I take an I section, it is convenient to break this into equivalent rectangles. So I break it into the top flange, half the web, the bottom flange and half the lower part of the web, right, into 4 rectangles, and I calculate C1, C2, C3, T4, etc. and then I take their moments about the neutral axis to get my MP. Okay, so C1 into its lever arm will give me MP1, C2 into its lever arm will give me MP2, and T3 into its lever arm will give me MP3, and T4 into its lever arm will give me MP4. Okay, so like that we are going to calculate the total MP. What will be C1? C1 is basically what is that, area, that is B into T. In this case I am calling this width of the flange as B, thickness of the flange as T, into Fy gives me the C1 force, and it is acting exactly at from here. If I take from the neutral axis, this total distance is D by 2 minus T by 2, right. So my lever arm is D by 2 minus T by 2, so that gives me MP1. Similarly, I can calculate MP2, MP3 and MP4, and if I put all that and add up, I will get my total MP of a cross section. And once I get that, if I compare MP as ZP into Fy, if I compare with ZE into Fy, then I find that ZP by ZE comes to about roughly around 1. Let's say 1 to 1.15 maximum, right, in some very thick web members. So it is like 10 to 15% more, okay, 1.1 to 1.15, right. So it's not very much compared to rectangle. We had 50% more, but here we get a much less value. So that is how we are going to get. So we will say that the conservatively for I sections or even channel sections or box sections, we take this value as around 1.12. Okay, shape factor is taken as 1.12. If I don't want to calculate, I will calculate My, multiply it by 1.12, and I will say that is my conservative estimate of the MP. Okay, so that is another way of getting MP. Let's go further. and see this is what actually happens, gradual plastification across the cross section. We have seen this in the yesterday also. Let's see now what the code says about calculating the moment capacity of various beams, right, beam sections. So as usual, limit state equation, it says that the factored bending moment denoted as M, that is the working stress bending, working load bending moment multiplied by the load factor, that gives me the design bend, the factored bending moment, that should be less than the design strength of the section, which is denoted as MD. Okay. So for laterally supported beam, there is no issue with lateral buckling or anything. It is the total, it is going to reach MP, right? So that is what we are looking at. So the code, as I pointed out, if we go back into the section classification, we know that if it is a plastic section or a compact section, my beam can go on bending until it reaches MP, right? So my plastic capacity should be, MD should be ZP into Fy, right? This is my MP. Okay, this part is my MP. And since Fy has an uncertainty, my design capacity, the minute I put D, I should put gamma M naught. Okay, so MP will be ZP Fy, but MD will be MP by gamma M naught. Okay, so this will be my plastic design capacity. Okay, so the instead of writing like this for plastic and compact, and then if I go for semi-compact section, it is going to be, I can't reach MP, so it has to be MY, right? So ZE into Fy will be my MY, and M design will be ZE into Fy by gamma M naught, right? So it will be like this. So instead of writing that, the code has used a factor beta, and what it says is, like for plastic and compact sections, you take beta as 1. So that means MD will be MP by gamma M naught. Okay, and for semi-compact sections, it says that you take beta B as ZE by ZP. So I'll substitute this here. What will happen is this ZP will get cancelled. So MD will come out as ZE Fy by gamma M naught, which is nothing but My by gamma M naught. Okay, so that is how we get the capacities, and it says that whatever may be your section, you can't exceed a shape factor of 1.2. So don't go beyond 1.2. This is because there is some issue with shear and bending interaction which comes in when, so we may not exactly be able to reach MP for a rectangular section, okay, because of presence of shear force. So there's an upper limit, but this will rarely govern for any of the sections that you will ever use. So you don't have to always check this. You just do this correctly and you will get your design bending capacity. So if you have to design a beam, you calculate the bending moment, you choose a section, check its MD. If MD is greater than M, your design is okay. Otherwise, you take a higher section and design, right? If MD is very, very large compared to M, then you take a slightly lower section and then make sure that you also get an economical solution, right? So it should be economical and safe. So that is about what is called as laterally supported beams, okay? So now laterally unsupported beams, if you take a, let's say, a I-section cantilever, you apply a vertical load at the tip, you are applying a load, so you will get a triangular bending moment. The maximum bending is at the support. So you will think that you will go on increasing the load until this bending moment becomes MP, right? But in reality, that is not the case. The beam may buckle much earlier than what you are doing. So you have to now understand that even the normal, what you call, plastic analysis will not be valid, or the stress analysis itself is not valid. We have to do a buckling analysis. Just as you took a column, went on putting axial load, okay, your P by A was your stress, and your stress had not reached Fy, but before that it reached F critical, so it buckled. Okay, so here also beams can buckle at loads much below their moment capacities for corresponding on supported beams, and this is how you have a problem, right? So to take care of this, we have to understand how to do a buckling analysis and bring that value in the design. So the lateral torsional buckling of symmetric sections is quite similar to what we do for Euler's buckling of a column. So the same assumptions which Euler made, that is, he said the column is perfectly straight. So here we have written it as beam is undistorted. So that means my beam is perfectly straight in plan. Okay, that is when I look from above, it is perfectly straight. and then it has elastic behavior. It should have a Young's modulus. Now we also have some more assumptions. Loading is done by equal and opposite movements in the plane of the web. So we want to keep the bending moment constant in the entire length of the beam. So we'll apply equal and opposite bending moment. So my bending moment diagram will be a rectangle for this simply supported beam. Again, I assume no residual stresses. Ends are simply supported vertically and laterally. So if I have a knife edge and I keep my beam, okay, then when I apply load, it can rotate about this support, right? That is what you call it as a hinge support. So that is in the elevation. But now I'm worried about buckling in plan. So I want to know what constitutes a simple support in plan. So it will look something like you put two fingers and put your hand in between. Okay. So now you can rotate your hand without moving like this, right? This fingers are not allowing this support to move this way, but then they are allowing free rotation. So that is a simple support in plan. Okay. So if the beam is simply supported in plan and it's loaded along the center line of the web and it equal what you call end moments, and it has elastic behavior and it's undistorted, then we can set up a differential equation like what we did for columns, the Euler's equation we derived. So something similar we can derive. Here these two lines are supposed to represent these two fingers. So basically we are saying that this beam is having a simple supported. We can also denote it by two circles if you are drawing a line for a beam, right? A vertical line for a beam. So it will deflect like this, and then based on the deflection we are going to get what is called as a differential equation, and then we solve it to get the critical moment, right? So the critical moment will be a sum of two what I should say resistances. Let's go back and see why or what happens exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply, let's say, equal end moments. That is, I'm going to bend about the XX axis in this case, or ZZ axis as per the code, the major axis. So as a consequence, what will happen is the beam will of course deflect downwards because of bending, the bending moment. And then what is happening is it is buckling laterally. So it is deflecting laterally. So the cross section has come out from that original plane in which it was there. Okay, so if this is my web, it is going to deflect laterally like this. And then it has also twisted a little bit, right? So why has it twisted? Because as something unique that is happening, as I said, the top part of the beam that above the neutral axis is the one which is in compression, and that is the one which wants to laterally buckle. Okay, the bottom part of the beam is in tension, so it doesn't want to laterally buckle. So what is happening is the top flange is pulling the beam out of its plane, but the bottom plane is trying to take it back in. So as a consequence, your cross section will not only deflect, but it will rotate a little bit, right? So you have this theta also coming in. Okay, so what is happening is we have flexural buckling, and then we also have torsional buckling. So we call this as a flexural torsional buckling. So lateral buckling is normally denoted as or said to be flexural torsional buckling. Okay, and as a consequence, the torsional stiffness of the cross section comes into picture. Okay, so if there are some cross sections like a circular tube or whatever rectangular tube, they are very difficult to twist. So they will not have so much pronounced torsion, they will have only lateral buckling. But then sections like I sections, channel sections and all are very easy to twist. So they will have a pronounced torsion. So that is what we see in the here. You see that it has deflected downwards, it has deflected sideways, and the I section has rotated also. So this web is not really vertical, it has actually got tilted a little bit, right? So that is what is happening. So that is why we get torsional resistance. Then one more resistance comes into picture, which is the warping resistance. So again, I sections, there are two types of torsion. One is called Saint Venance torsion or pure torsion, where like in pure bending we assume plane sections remain plane after bending. In torsion we assume that plane sections remain plane after twisting, right? So we are twisting this, but the section remains plane. But when I twist an I section, what will happen is it will not remain plane, it will go like this. Okay, one point will come out, one point will go inside. Okay, so that is called warping. So that resistance also comes into picture, and you get a equation which looks like this, where you have new terms called G and gamma and J and all that. G is anyway the shear modulus of elasticity. So we have three terms, EI, GJ and E gamma, we can say, okay, capital gamma. So EIY is the flexural rigidity about the minor axis, okay. So how easy it is to bend the beam in about the minor axis, so it will buckle also easily in the minor axis if that is easy to bend. So similarly GJ is the torsional rigidity, how easy it is to twist the beam, and E gamma is the warping rigidity. So all these three terms come into picture, and we need to be able to, the code gives you how to quickly calculate the value of J and gamma, etc. So we will be able to calculate and calculate MCR. Okay, we will go to the code equation later. For the time being, we just know that this is what has happened. But there are some other factors which also affect lateral stability. Like first is of course the support condition. This is showing a simply support. This is in elevation, simple support. But this is the plan view of the same beam. So as I look in elevation, I know this is simple support. I show it as a hinge. But in plan, when I look, I find two dots, and this beam is able to rotate about the in plan, okay, about that support, okay. So this is called a simply supported beam in plan. This is called a fixed beam in plan. That is, it has to start with zero slope and then only it can bend, and then again it has to go back to zero slope. So that will constitute what is called as the effective length for or unsupported length for buckling, okay. So in this case, the supports are at the same length L, but then the unsupported length will be less than the actual span of the beam, right. So that is the effect of support conditions. Parameter factor which affects the lateral buckling of beams is that since this beam is deflecting and twisting, where you apply the load makes a very important issue, right. If you apply the load on top of the beam, then it is trying to twist it further, okay. Whereas if you hang some beam, the same vertical load, but you are hanging below the beam, it is going to try and straighten it, right. So the torsion will be partly counteracted by the level of application of the load. So we call this as the load which is hung at the bottom flange is called a stabilizing load, and the load which is applied on the top flange is called a destabilizing load, okay. So we will assume that for analysis, we will assume the load is applied exactly in the middle, and with reference to that, we will increase the effective length, for example, to reduce the M critical value to get a to account for the destabilizing effect of the load on the top flange, okay. That can also be done. Then the type of loading, we started with, we derived this equation M critical for a beam which is under uniform bending moment, that is at the two ends we have applied bending moment M, or moment M. So we had a constant bending moment, but in reality beams don't have constant bending moment, right. You know that, for example, if you put a UDL, you get a parabolic bending moment, you get a large bending moment in the middle, but it becomes zero at the support. But that may not have much effect because in the middle is where the lateral buckling occurs, so there you have a large bending moment. But there may be beams where you have large bending moments at the supports, but not so much at midspan, right. So that type of bending moment or the way you are putting the loads on the beam matters. So that is also called as a moment gradient, okay. And as we saw, if the section is closed section like a tubular section, rectangular tube or square tube or whatever, then it is very rigid for torsion, right. Whereas if it is an open section like I section or channel section, then it is easy to twist. So that also matters. So all these factors are mattering, and somehow we need to account this into our design calculations, okay. So suppose we do all that, what I am saying is we can get a curve similar to the column strength curve. We said ideal columns will behave as per the buckling curve, elastic buckling curve, which will go like this. Practical columns can't take yield stress, stress more than yield stress, so there is a limit. So similarly, an ideal beam can buckle as per that equation which we have derived, that is at M critical, that will plot like this for based on the effective length. And then for practical beams, the movement cannot go beyond MP in any case, it can't go to infinity as L tends to 0, so we put a flat line. But for realistic beam, that is not ideal but practical beams, we also know that between this line and this line there is a transition curve which is for inelastic lateral buckling, okay. Just as we have in columns, So we have a curve which is quite similar to the column strength curve, and then we will derive the equation for this and use it for design as a beam strength curve. Okay. So this is what we are doing. This is we'll compare again our beam buckling with column buckling. In column, we applied an axial load P and it buckled laterally like this. The section literally moved in the lateral direction. So in beam also it is something similar. It moves, but then it also rotates. So something similar happens. But instead of axial load here, we are applying bending moment because beams are subjected to bending. So, and then we said for different end conditions we'll take care with effective length. So here also for different end conditions as well as variation of the bending moment, we'll take care by varying the effective length accordingly. Okay. So the equation that is given in the code as bending strength for lateral unsupported beam is quite similar to what we use for columns also. Basically, we call it as a design bending stress, right? So you have to read this as FBD as DBF, design bending stress into ZP into beta B. So that is how we are going to take. If it's a semi-compact section, beta B will be taken as ZE by ZP, or if it is a compact and plastic section, it will be taken as 1. Okay. So the design bending stress itself is obtained as chi LT into Fy by gamma m naught, as we did for a column, right? So FCD was something similar. So only thing is the chi here we differentiate by putting LT. LT stands for lateral torsional buckling. Okay. So the chi LT is given by exactly the same type of formula which we use for column buckling or column strength curve. So we used something called a imperfection factor. In this case, there are only 2 curves which are given because it's so complex that we can't consider all the possibilities. So we are conservatively and making it simple. We are using only 2 alpha LT values, one for roll section and one for welded section. So there will be 2 curves like A and B, for example, like the column strength curves, which will be used for design. Okay. So if you put that alpha, I'll get phi. I'll put phi and lambda, I'll get chi, and then from chi I can get FBD, and from that I'll get the moment capacity. So that is how the code says that we need to design. So I'm not showing 2 curves because that's quite similar to column strength curves. So that is the formula for lateral torsional buckling. The code also gives a simplified formula which says for I sections. So it says that instead of calculating, instead of J, it uses IT. This is called a torsional constant, and instead of gamma, it uses IW. It's called the warping constant. Okay. So these are how to calculate. They are given in the appendix, and it says that you can calculate MCR for I sections without calculating this IT or IW, just by going for something called H by TF ratio. H is the center to center distance of the flange and TF is the thickness of the flange. So only by using this and the RY for the cross section which you get from steel tables, I can calculate the MCR value. Okay, so that is a theoretical value. Again, from theoretical value, we will convert that using this lambda. I think this is the lambda. So MCR will come here, and as a consequence of this lambda, it will become FBD. Okay, rather than FCR. Okay, so that is that will take care of this. Alpha will bring in the imperfections, the residual stresses, everything into picture here, and we get a strength which is matching with the practical test results for real beams. So that is basically about lateral buckling of the beam. So now I would try and avoid lateral buckling if possible in many beams. So how do I do that? So let's say you can provide what is called as discrete bracing. So remember that if 2 beams are going to laterally buckle, just by connecting them with another piece in the middle is not going to help prevent lateral buckling, because they will both move together and this piece also will move as a rigid body. But then if I put cross bracing in plan, then I will be able to support some of the intermediate points, prevent them from moving out of the line of the beam, and I can avoid lateral buckling. Okay, so those are called discrete bracing. Or I can give a continuous support to the top flange in the form of a slab or something, so it doesn't allow this beam to laterally buckle. Okay, so discrete or continuous bracing is possible, and the level of attachment of the bracing should be the level of the compression flange. So that is where it will be most effective. So if you brace the tension flange, that is not going to help in any way, because it's the compression flange which is going to buckle and you are bracing the tension flange. It may help in a little bit, but it will not be very effective. So those are the points which we should understand to avoid lateral buckling. Okay. Then other failure modes are like beams also transmit shear. So if the shear capacity exceeds the capacity of the web, the shear force exceeds the capacity of the web, then the web may yield in shear, like as it's shown in this figure, the web may yield. So that is covered in section 8.4 of the code. And then there could be, as I said, buckling of the web and crippling, or it is also called crushing of the web. Okay. So buckling of the, if this is my web and this is the flange, suppose I apply point load, this web will buckle between the flanges, right? So this is how the web is going to buckle. So we need to calculate that at points where we have concentrated loads. And crippling of the web is when you apply a load, only due to stress concentration, only our local part of the web will crush. So that is called crippling of the web. So we'll just look at these two and then we'll see how to calculate this. So the first is web buckling. So what we are saying is, if any beam, even though you don't have a point load, there will be a reaction at the support, right? So this is my beam simply supported at this end over a certain distance. This is called a stiff bearing length. So my reaction is applied over a short support length, which is called a stiff bearing length. And as a consequence, this web of the beam is buckling, right? So now I want to make sure that this should not happen. So I need to calculate at what load this web will buckle. So the code says you assume that this load will get dispersed by the time you come to the middle of the depth of the web where the buckling is occurring. This will get dispersed at 45 degrees. So I'll have a cross section which is B1 plus N1 in one dimension, and the other dimension is the thickness of the web. Okay. So this, like a plate, is going to buckle now, right, as a web. We will look at it exactly as a column, right? So as I said, if this is my B1 plus N1, this is my thickness T, and this is going to buckle like this as a column. So how do I calculate? So for that B1 plus N1 T section, I calculate the Ry, I'll calculate lambda, and corresponding to lambda, don't look at this, corresponding to basically lambda, I'll go to the section 7 of the code about columns, I'll calculate FCD value, and FCD into area of cross section gives me the web buckling strength. Okay, that is called as PWB. Okay. Now if this web buckling strength is more than the reaction that is coming at the support, then that means my web will not buckle. But if it is less, then web is likely to buckle. Okay, so I have to do something. What can I do? One thing I can do is I can increase the stiff bearing length. I give little more width for the support. Okay, so if I increase B1, then probably this entire thing may increase and this may come more than the reaction. So that is one possibility. Other possibilities are like I can give a stiffener. So this web is buckling like this, means I'll attach a strip of plate like a stiffener like this, and that will prevent the web from buckling. Okay, so that also can be done. So there are ways in which we will, but the thing is, as a designer, we have to make sure that the webs will not buckle due to concentrated loads. Okay. So now this again you don't have to do for roll sections, because most roll sections have fairly thick webs and their depths are not so high. So we have a limitation on the D by T ratio of the web, okay, such that web buckling will normally not govern. So you will have to do this only for fabricated I sections. Okay, so that is one thing. Then web crippling, as I said, occurs due to local stress concentration effects, right? So as I said, if I apply variety of loads on the beam, all these loads will come, they will eventually have to flow into the support, right? So at the support location there could be stress concentration. This is when I'm assuming that the beam is just kept on the support like this, right? So we will get all the forces coming and entering on the support, and of course you have a flange at the bottom. So the flange helps at this point where the reaction comes, but after you cross the flange, in roll sections you have something called a root radius. Okay, so that is why there is one more line drawn here to show that this is the root radius. Instead of that, in welded section you will have a weld. Okay, so that weld toe will be the size of the weld will be the same as the root radius that is shown here. So just above that, all these forces which are there. So in the support you have a wide flange and all the forces are applied there, but then eventually those forces have to enter into the web. So all these loads that this which you see here on the section, all these loads have to eventually enter into the thin web. So web will have stress concentration problem. So how to take care of that? The code says that you assume that this load or the width B1 will get dispersed over a ratio of 1:2.5. That is, if this plus this is 1, then N1 is 2.5 times of that. Okay, so that is N2. So just above the root radius, I have a section which is B1 plus N2 in width direction, and thickness is TW, thickness of the web, right? So that is the cross section. So this load now is taken over B1 plus N2 into TW. This that should be W here into Fy of the web. That will be the crippling load or crushing load for the web. Okay. So if you find that this P crippling is greater than the reaction that is coming, then crushing will not occur. If P crippling is less than that, then crushing may occur. So as I said, one option is to increase B1 to avoid crushing, or we may have to provide a stiffener at this location. The stiffener will look like this, like a maybe trapezoidal or rectangular plate will be welded at the flange web junction, so that this pressure will not make this web cripple. That is, it will not bend, make it bend. So our stiffener will prevent this from crushing. Okay. So that is how it can be tackled. So these are two checks which we need to do as per the code, and shear is taken as Fy by √3 gamma m0, as I said, the stress in shear into the area of the web. So we assume that the entire shear is carried by the web. So Fy by √3 gamma m0 into depth of web into thickness of web will give me the shear capacity to prevent shear yielding of the web. Okay. That way, even in a simple supported beam, I need to make sure that I clear the bending check, then I clear the shear check, then I clear web buckling check, web crippling check, the deflection check. Then only my design gets complete for one beam. Okay. So this is the summary. We can have questions on beams now. Okay. Ramanjanelu has asked two questions. One is, what is meant by actual path and complementary shear? Complementary shear, as I said, if you apply shear in one direction, like let's say vertical shear, then there has to be a complementary shear, because this is giving, like let's say clockwise rotation in one direction. So there has to be a complementary shear which will give rotation in the other direction. And actual path is basically the path in which the load deformation curve goes. Maybe you are confusing clubbing that question with something else. Then the other question was laced and batten columns, two sections tied together such that they act as one cross section. So I can get the moment of inertia of this combined section, and then I can use that as this thing. Okay. Yeah. Plastic. Other chat question, that is why plastic section is preferred. Plastic section, as I said, is preferred basically because you can do plastic analysis. That is one thing. And as I showed you in the fixed beam, that multiple hinges can form, and then the capacity of the section can go up considerably if you have if you go for plastic analysis and design. Okay.
So the question is, those two lines in the case of web buckling and web crippling. In the case of web buckling, we see that the angle is to the horizontal is 45 degree, and in other case it is 1:2.5, so around 21 degrees. So which are the 2 points from where these two lines should pass exactly? I mean, the lower point I'm interested.
Lower point is the end of the stiff bearing length. That is, let's say if you have a seat angle or whatever, so the edge of that seat angle will be the point through which these lines should pass. Okay.
And if it is a T section?
Yeah.
If it is a T section, then... Okay.
If it's a T section means what? Like, basically the support. You have a support on which you are placing this beam, the edge of the support.
Yes. Okay, that is the lowest most point. Okay, thank you.
What is elastic buckling? Basically, elastic buckling is buckling within the elastic limit. That is, the stresses are still below Fy. Okay. If the stresses are stress has reached Fy and then buckling happens, then it's called plastic or inelastic buckling. Okay. Then what is the main difference between laterally supported and unsupported beam is the lateral support that is given to the beam. That is the main difference. So a laterally supported beam will not laterally buckle. It will go on bending until it reaches the plastic movement capacity or My or whatever may be the capacity of the beam. But if it is laterally unsupported, then it will buckle at MCR. Okay. So which will be less than My or MP. Okay, one more question from Jagbir regarding web buckling, and yeah, that I have already answered exact points where this line should pass. The reason for angles to be decided as 45 and 21 is that it's basically a approximation, I would say. As I showed, for web buckling, the section at the mid height of the web matters. So we are taking it at that 45-degree dispersion angle. And for web crippling, it is the way the stress goes through the web flange plate and the root radius and enters the web. So that is why the 21-degree or whatever angle has been chosen. Why there are no residual stresses in lateral? No, there are residual stresses in the sense we have two strength curves for lateral torsional buckling, and we are using that same alpha value for rolled and alpha for welded section. So those take care of residual effect of residual stresses on lateral buckling. Okay. Shearing, actually shearing in plate in the sense, I think shear buckling of the plate, Tamilar C has asked. So shear buckling, because of the complementary shear, you get one diagonal in compression, the other diagonal goes in tension, and as a consequence that compression diagonal can buckle in shear, but the tension diagonal continues to carry tension. So the plate as a whole continues to carry tension, carry more load, more shear. Tamil RSC has again asked explain about torsional buckling. So as I said, basically when the web buckles laterally, the beam buckles laterally, because of that the top flange wants to go further beyond, whereas the bottom flange doesn't want to go. So what happens is, as a consequence, a twisting of the cross section also takes place. So that is basically torsional buckling, but it is coupled with lateral buckling. So we always call it as lateral torsional buckling. Okay. So there is also something called pure torsional buckling, but that is again different. Then tomorrow we will be covering welded connections, and then after that we will have a second session on tutorials. Okay. Thank you very much.